So in the end of 2018, I retired and worked my last day on December 31st. And then we had sold our house in the morning, closed on it. I worked. We packed up 2 cars and my wife drove ahead of me 3 hours to our cottage, and got to drive through a snowstorm, which I didn't think I would make it. So I got to our lake house and there was still lots of work to do, but my goal was to make a layout, of course. And I made an issue of model railroader.
Oh,
Can
yeah.
you go to full screen?
What's that?
You're not on full screen.
Okay.
Yeah, just
Somebody
hit
can help me with where I need to push a button to.
yeah, just go down to the right-hand side and that little icon that looks like a screen. That you're close.
Yeah, next one over. Keep going. Keep
Yeah,
going.
there you
That
go.
one.
All right, good.
Yes.
So I had kind of a thrill of a lifetime when a fellow from Model Railroad called me and said, did I want to have my Model Railroad photographed? Well, he had called me a couple years earlier than I retired, and I was in transition, actually torn down the previous layout, which he had heard about. I said, well, when I get another one, I will let you know.
All right,
Now, how do I advance these?
you just click. There you go.
All right, so this is my model railroad, and it's not terribly large. Unfortunately, we moved into our cottage on the lake, and I only had a space of 10 by 24 feet to put it into. And on my previous layouts, the 2 previous ones, I'd modeled Baraboo, my hometown, and I modeled adjacent towns to it, which I had no space for, but I was able to utilize all the structures and the rolling stock, et cetera. So building a model railroad in 1,000 days wasn't that big of a deal. And in my layout, I've got 2 staging yards, and the layout kind of operates like a Shakespearean stage. You know, all the world is a stage, and the trains enter stage left and stage right. And so that's the way I operate, is the passenger trains come in, stop at the depot, the freight trains roll through or have switching, whatever. And that's an operating session for me, which could involve, depending on what time period I pick, in 1960s, there was lots of passenger trains. So this is when I moved, this is what it looked like. Unfortunately, the train room was also the dumping ground for everything else in the house when we moved. So I had to build around all the stuff stuck on the floor there and out of the material. So it was a challenge to work around the boxes. I did have the room finished off in blue, and then I cove 2 of the corners because I really like the effect of other people's layouts. And I also have a stereo which occupies underneath the train layout too. My wife made me insulate the ceiling so she didn't have to listen to the stereo when I was down in the basement. She has slightly different musical taste than I do. And here I'm swinging around the end, and all of the bench work, or most of it's cantilevered off the wall. So I've got no legs underneath to store things, except this one area at the one end. I had to have some legs.
Mark, can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
Are you a Led Zeppelin type of guy? You kind of look it.
classic rock is my thing, yes.
Ah, okay.
Now I laid the track fairly quickly, and then I wanted to paint the rails and the ties, so I had to mask the walls off that were blue, and I used an airbrush, and it actually didn't have that much of a mess. I probably didn't need to mask it, but then I painted all the track in place with one coat. Then I came back and painted a random number of ties, lighter or darker, came back and then painted the sides of the rails also. And in spite of all that work, it's not that noticeable. So if I had to do it again, maybe I'd just skip. And this is, you can see the cove corners. I didn't bring them all the way down to the layout because I wasn't sure how the track was going to be. So I'm kind of like, I built it. I laid track to see what would work. And this is the end wraps around, and here I'm going to have to put in, at this point, there's going to be a swing gate. So I'm too old to crawl underneath the layout. So I decided the swing gate was the way to go. I don't have enough space that I could have had spirals and try and get up. So it's a single level layout. Here you can see the formations. I'm starting to get some area prepared. Most of it's at a single level, but parts of it are sunken down by the river, the Baraboo River, and I needed to have some lower bench work for those areas. Here I'm also fitting buildings. The track isn't all been done yet. If anybody sees something, they just chime right in. There's a little bit less junk under the layout now as we're moving into the house, but the wires still are hanging pretty unfinished. There's no operation yet because all the track hasn't been laid.
Looks pretty normal to me.
Yeah. Now here I've got the swing gate completed on the left-hand side and it's painted olive green color. And I also, in the olive green under the layout, I've got a workbench on rollers that I roll out. And then I just don't have that much space. So I had to create a workbench that rolls out of the way. Here I'm working on one of the storage yards. And the area actually goes down to a lower level where the Northwestern refrigerator shops were along the river. So there's some change in grade on parts of the layout. As I was working along, I knew I wanted to have a backdrop, and a friend had given me this section of backdrop hanging on the right-hand side. And I liked the hills a lot, but the one thing that you really can't do is match the blue and continue the sky all the way up. But I was also working with some little pictures I had blown up and printed of actual places in Baraboo, and they're taped up temporarily to see how they would fit in with the rest of the scenery. So a lot of trial and error. Now this is the other staging area is now got a little low barrier so you can't see it. And the Northwestern refrigerator shops are installed that large yellow building. I made a mistake when I built that barrier. I wanted it so I couldn't see the trains behind there, but it's not high enough so you can take photographs of the model railroad without looking over the top of that short backdrop. And it turns out it's high enough that you can't see the trains anyway. So I'd been better off having just built it taller.
Is that a brand new water heater?
Yes, it is. But
Oh, good.
but I do have a big enough aisle there that I can bring it out and put it in another one.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah, that was a consideration. And I had thought maybe I would put in one of those instantaneous heaters that kind of hangs on the wall because it would take less space. But it didn't really help me that much because along the way, you see some white piping behind that low backdrop. We put in a bathroom in the basement and it couldn't drain into the septic. So we had to put a sump tank in. So we had to chisel out the floor, and all that piping sits in an area that could have been used for a model road. Also, the wall furnaces failed, and we put in central air, and then the ductwork got placed in all these places that I would not have chosen to put them, but we didn't have a choice, and we didn't have heat. This is the car shops, just temporarily set in place and got the tracks fit up next to it. This was a very large employer and structure in Baraboo. It over 600 feet long in reality, but I didn't have space to model it. So I've got about 40% of that actual length. And it was built as Ringling Brothers car shops. They left town, then the Northwestern Refrigerator line bought it to maintain their fleet, which they
It's
didn't
still
know.
there.
It's, oh, the building still stands, yes.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
Very nice.
part of the Circus World Museum, is that correct?
Circus World Museum owns it now, and they store all of their railroad equipment in it.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a few years ago, I think it maybe 93 or on, we had a Northwestern Charter Office Historical Society meeting in Baraboo, and we got to go inside the shops. That was fabulous because they had painted the cars there, and they were originally gray, but then they went to a green and yellow paint scheme, and there were still green paint painted out on the walls where they had cleaned out a paintbrush. So you could actually get paint samples, of true color. That blew my mind. But the employees that worked at the shop, when they rebuilt the refrigerator car, the wood was burned. So they would take it home and build things. So any number of garages in Baraboo had wood salvaged from refrigerator cars lining the inside of their garage.
Are the little patches of white, is that white glue that hasn't dried yet?
Well, it has dried.
Oh,
But yeah, that I glued it rather than nailed it, and I'm not sure that was the right thing to do either, but
well, that's what ballast is for.
and here's the swing gate in the open position, and I didn't get very fancy with it. You see there's just a wire that connects to it. And there's no protection. If I had the layout on, I could drive a train off the end of that. I probably shouldn't have done that, but it was the quickest way forward rather than having circuits that turned off, etc. I generally come into the train room, close the swing gate, and then turn the power on for the layout. So I don't try and create a situation where I could drive them off.
The problem is, where I've done is back the caboose off. So pretty soon you got bang, bang, bang until you finally realize what it is.
What,
Yeah.
what do you have operating the train order signal on that?
It's just fixed position.
Okay,
That was a kit that Lloyd Kaiser had been involved in producing. I got that, I don't know, 25 years ago. I was smart enough to buy 2 of them. And the other one you'll see on the Baraboo passenger depot. Then it was time for clouds. And first I bought some commercial cutout stencils, and you can see those in place. Then I realized that I could just take cereal boxes and cut my own. That's what I did because it became real repetitive when you use the same ones over and over again. But as long as you have enough, don't get carried away with the spray paint, you can overspray and create a mess for yourself. You got to repaint out. So this is probably not enough coverage here, but I made it work. And then you can lap over and build up. So it's usually white spray paint very lightly across the top, a brown down below, then you can move the forms and add some other clouds in along the way. And I found that was an effective replacement to the idea of having photo backdrops, which would have been expensive. And I was trying to piece them together myself. on a computer program, but trying to get the blue skies to match was driving me nuts. So there's a cloud that's been formed some levels, different layers on it. Then I came back with a hand brush and I've taken a and highlighted the tops of some of the clouds and added some more in there just to give it more three-dimensional. I'm quite pleased with it. I'm not trying to paint a Rembrandt, but I want something in the background that doesn't detract from the main action. Now, something Ron helped me with, and you can see it on the backdrop, there's that red building and a big white building. He said, Mark, if you want to make a backdrop, you can just go on Google Earth and Street View, and you can drive around town and take pictures and then just piece them together. So the buildings in the background is Baraboo. So I just went to the site, drove down the street, took a bunch of pictures, then just pieced them together. And where I didn't have the right buildings, then I stole buildings from somewhere else and stuck them on there. It really wasn't that hard. Over the feed mill, you can see a large brick brewery, and that's where the Effinger Brewery was, but it was torn down in the 70s. But I was able to get a picture off the South County Historical Society, and I hand colored it and just glued it on, and it's to me, that's just the way it should be. Now I had to create the crossing here at Walnut Street, so I just had some thin plywood to set the base. It actually goes downhill past the red building and down to the river. So that was the first thing I did. And then I cut styrene to fit in the track. Then I gave it a base coat, added some wood. And then I could take it off and using chalk weather the road and then put it back into place. Here's what it looks finished looking down river. I think I didn't quite match. It's kind of purpley, the road, but it's fairly good, the meeting there at the backdrop. Here's the car shops with a little bit of scenery on them. And again, I just drove through the countryside over some farm fields and shot pictures of trees, pieced them all together, and then glued it on. And it worked. I think it looks pretty good, and even with the clouds that I had made. Here's, I think, similar to a picture I'd shown of activities of the guys working at the shops. Here is pretty near finished. You can see the depot on the right-hand side. That structure took me 10 years to build, only because I worked so little at it at a time. The structure exists today, so I could go down and measure it, but all of the windows were taken out and cement block was put in there, and was used as a warehouse. So it and the yellow structure, northwestern structure, are the only two buildings on my layout that still exist on the prototype.
Very nice.
Here's the other end of the railroad, and it has all of the correct buildings for Baraboo.
What are the handles for?
Okay, so I've got a chair with wheels, like drafting, so I sit up kind of higher, and I can just grab those hand over hand and pull myself around the layout.
Okay, all right.
That's kind of lazy, but I like to operate on the chair because now everything is at eye level, and I can just more realistic. I'm also getting old and I have multiple sclerosis, and walking is difficult. So those are handy rather than grab the layout and tear scenery off.
Looks like it's getting neater underneath the layout there too.
Yeah, there's certainly less, and I put a black curtain to hide some of the stuff that remained there. Then Dave Rickaby from Model Railroad drove over. He lives in Marinette, Wisconsin, the northeast corner of the state. So he drove over and photographed my layout, spent a day photographing my layout. And the Model Railroad magazine only used 5 photos from the shoot, but he shot a ton more pictures. So I'm just going to show you the other pictures that were shot at that time. So there's the depot. And can you imagine a person that I know who lives in Baraboo and prints decals and 3D prints things? He is going to make the Baraboo depot available in a 3D printed kit.
Oh, nice.
He was going to show it at the Model Railroad show in Madison. It's last month, if anybody was there. And I've kind of helped my drawings, etc. And I'm thinking I might replace mine with his because it looks fabulous. This is the viaduct over South Boulevard, and the root beer stand was actually on the other side of the tracks, and so was the gas station, but that's where I had a place to put them. And the photo backdrop, which was taken off a street view, is the bridge across the Baraboo River. So that's here's the car shops, and they're getting ready to come down and grab some of the cars for the circus train. It happened annually for a while. I do have a circus train, and the friend in Baraboo, he 3D prints these circus wagons that you can see here. They are tremendous. And the one on the left says America on it. That is, you paint it white, you got to deal with the wheels, but otherwise it's a series of decals that he prints that you build up all of the sides and just,
Oh, my goodness.
so you don't have to paint any of that, but it's a series of decals that he prints.
Huh.
They're just fabulous. If you want to have circus wagons authentic, that's the only way to go. And the other end is the 2-headed dragon, which was, since I was a kid, was my favorite wagon. We used to every spring have a school trip, and the school saved money, so we just walked down to the Circus World Museum, which was great, except you did it every year. And here's them loading the circus train like they would have in Baraboo with the actual buildings that were there at the time. Now they're just pulling some of the loaded cars. They had to load them in sets until they had the entire train. Another picture. This is the rock train that ran from Rock Springs and supplied all of the ballast for the Northwestern until they abandoned, or they cut off the Baraboo line. It was a through line in 1987. And then Northwestern had some sort of arrangement with Burlington Northern that the quarry at Rock Springs supplied the eastern side of Chicago Northwestern, and Burlington Northern had a pit. So they would exchange ballast. So Burlington Northern would run a train up once a week with their equipment and engines and load ballast trains, which made it very exciting to see something else in Baraboo. This is Zach Onicle's scrapyard, and my brothers and I would scrounge around town and pick up cans and pieces of lead, and we drag them down there to Zach Onicle, the old guy. He would grudgingly pay us something for what we had dragged in, but he really wanted to deal with larger quantities.
Hmm.
And talk about doing something new. I did acquire a steam engine. And I've got DCC in it, and it runs fairly well, but I'd like to have sound and I'd like to have a current saver. And I've got to do some rewiring and put all of the stuff in the tender, because right now the decoder is up in the body. I just haven't got ambitious enough. And my rule was that if it ran through Baraboo, then I have to have a model of it. If it didn't, I don't care less. But 1385 was located at Mid-Continent Railroad Museum in North Freedom. It was seen in Baraboo and it led 3 circus trains. So it was a must-have, the R1.
Did they get it finished yet?
They have not. It has poked along forever.
Yeah, I know.
Every year I think I'm going to go over there and see it, but
I heard somebody else is doing a 10 wheeler or one like that, and they've just about got it done.
Northwest or the R1 1385, they had to replace everything essentially.
It's got a new boiler, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a completely new boiler.
Yeah.
And the last time they rebuilt it, geez, late 80s.
Hmm.
No, a little earlier than that, but China was still making steam engines. They were able to get some of what the fire tubes they needed from there. But here they had to be fabricated, and that drove the cost up and just made everything more difficult. So as part of the photography on the layout, I only have like 4 inches from the front edge to the track, and the photographer had to be very clever in photographing because we didn't want one to look as realistic as possible and not show the fascia. So after he had left, I thought, well, I still want to do photography. And I came up with the idea of the temporary scenic extensions. And you can see on one side, I got this temporary scenic extension that it just clamps onto the layout and can be moved around. So I can take photography and have foreground.
So there's an article in Railroad Model Craftsman where somebody else has used this same idea. I don't know if you saw that. I think it's this month.
It is.
They didn't give you any credit, Mark, so I was going to write a letter.
I'm not sure how he did his, but I'll just show you. So mine, I created these. One is curved and it fits in the curved end of the layout. The other one is, so that's 46 inches long and curved to match the layout. The other one is a square rectangle, 30 inches long. In the bottom side, it's just a foil covered styrofoam. So it's very stiff with the foil. And then I built some legs on it just out of 2x2s and scrap lumber, glued it on, and then put some felt pads, because when I would clip it onto the layout, it would scratch some of the fascia. So I put on that. So now I can take all kinds of, you can see before and after. Here's a picture with the fascia. I've clamped it on, taken the picture, then I can just unclamp it and move on.
Hmm.
So it's been a real boon to take more photography later for me. And here's a low angle looking across that. And I found with the temporary scenic extensions, you're better off not to have anything high that would get in the way of your low angle photography. And you don't want to have an outhouse or something distinctive that's going to keep showing up in photos all around your layout. So it should just be real generic and plain looking. Nothing is distinctive, so you can reuse it somewhere else. But I think it's very effective for this picture here with the clouds and
Is that with your room light?
that's just with some LEDs. Yeah.
Okay.
Very nice.
I think that might be it. Yeah,
Good.
that would be it. So yeah, somebody asked about being done, and you're really never done. Because I've still got any number of circus wagons to do. Lester, you've inspired me to go back on some of my freight cars, and I'm driving myself nuts right now trying to drill holes to put in wire grabs. I'm just getting too old for this. I'm sorry.
Never too old, never too old.
I'm probably gonna get carpal tunnel out of the whole.
I did.
You know, I had carpal tunnel too, but that electric drill that I purchased here, maybe 6 months ago, that's a fantastic tool to help me.
Yep.
If I do any drilling now, I get that out.
So that's looking like a really good idea, that electric drill. I gotta look into that.
I think, wasn't it Doug that actually found the information?
I did, and I posted it, to the group at one time in the past, but I'm sure we can dig up the message again. I purchased one as well, and for what, $35. Yeah, it's a nice handy little,
Yeah,
power
it goes
drill.
clear, it goes down to 0. Mine does.
yep.
So I can put in an 80, but I don't usually use anything smaller than a 78 anymore.
Hey, Mark, quick question for you. Your friend who does the decals and the 3D printing, is that something he does commercially for people or just?
Yes, he's got a website, so it's Circus City Decals
.com?
.com. Yeah. It's
And
Thank you.
he's got a whole bunch of wild decals.
I mean, you can get decals of Northwestern cabooses that are all rusted up, so pre-weathered. You just put the decal on. But
Very interesting. Thank you.
all different kind of railroads. He builds 3D printed parts for iron ore boats, for instance. I mean, his catalog is huge.
I'll have to look him up.
Question on one place, one of the photos you had Durham's water putty. Curious what you're using that for?
Okay, so I like Durham water putty. If I've got a hole in the wood, like in the bench work, then I'll just fill it in to make the scenery smooth. I like it better than plaster because it's very durable.
Okay.
And sometimes I will put in little blocks of wood so I can mount the Caboose Industries hand throws for the switches. And I'll just taper it. I put in a little block of wood and I taper it away from that with the Durham's water putty. You got use for it yourself?
I have it, I have a can of it, but I never really used it on the railroad. And when I saw it, I was curious but that's very effective use, like to fill in around the wood blocks for, let's say, a ground thrower, things like that. That's very effective.
Because you can drill through it and it holds. If you use plaster, it just busts.
Well, it sands like wood. Once it sets up, it sands just like wood.
All right, well, thanks very much, Mark. Great job. And nice to see your layout is at a point at least where you're operating and it's largely finished, even though it gives you plenty of more things to enjoy building.
So it was roughly 1,000 days from the time I retired until the photographer came out to photograph it, which was actually more than a year ahead of when it appeared in Model Railroad magazine.
Wow.
And he had come out and photographed another model railroad in my area a month earlier, and it's never appeared yet. So I don't. He doesn't get to make those decisions. He's a private contractor. He does this on the side and sells it to Northwestern.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess Model Railroad, Clark has mentioned that if they're interested, they pay you for it, in whether it gets published or not. So.
Yep. they'll buy it and they might hold it. There's sometimes they'll publish something that's been, was created by someone who died 5 years ago.
Yeah,
But because they have it in their files, it's their property, and so they do that.
right.
Yeah.
And at times they want to bury an article or something that they don't want published.
Or they
And,
don't want the competitor to get.
Yeah, exactly. So they
Yeah.
buy it. And it
That's
dies in
true.
the files.
It happened to me a couple
Yep.
times. They came and took pictures and never, it was a railroad model craftsman did that to me too. Never saw her hiding her hair of it.
Mhm.
I played on a record album like that way back in the 70s. Kept waiting for the recording.
I
to come
think
in the mail.
RMC loses things between editors.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, in the background, over your left shoulder, there's a picture above the Geary Community something or other. It
Yeah,
looks like it's a cover from a band or something.
that's
picture.
a poster for a concert I did back in the 90s with Robin Ford. If anybody's a blues fan, you know Robin Ford.
I know Robin Ford, yeah.
Yeah, so that's an
absolutely.
that's an autograph poster from the concert where my band Uncle Heavy and the Seeing Eye Horns opened for Robin Ford in the Blue Line.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
It doesn't show up so well. I didn't know if that was you with hair. That's what I was trying to say.
No, it's been a long time. I did have long hair in the 70s, but that's been a while.
And didn't we all?
Yeah, I had to,
Right. We
I had to
probably
laugh
all
when
did.
Ken accused you of looking like a Led Zeppelin fan. That I think that characterization has changed over the years. Now this is what Led Zeppelin fans look like, bald head.
No, was it last week somebody mentioned about we all ought to get a picture of when we were 18, 19 years
Oh,
old and
yeah.
share those some night.
Yeah.
Bangs down to the eyebrows, hair on the shoulders. Yeah, baby.
When we run out of model railroad topics, then we'll do something like that. All right. Well, are there any other updates today? Anybody have anything else to present?
What was the name of that circus website again? The 3D guy?
Circus City Decals.
Circus.
Circus City Decals.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Mark,
next-
I'm going to have a friend of mine who's not in our group here, but it lives in Baraboo. In fact, he lives in the Ringling Brothers' sister's house, if that makes any sense to you.
There were 8 Ringling brothers, so that doesn't tell me which house that is.
Well, it's the sister. It's the sister, so there's only one of them.
It's the convent.
Yeah.
Anyway, he bought, he's a model railroader, circus guy, and I'll get him to get your email, and I hope you can ask or show him your layout.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, great.
Send him the video. All right. Next week, Lester is going to give it a
Oh,
clinic.
no, I can't do it.
Oh, can't do it next
I'm
week?
sorry, I haven't written, Greg. I can do it the following Thursday, but next week we have the modelers retreat here.
Oh,
And
okay, very
that
good.
begins, that's for the weekend. We start Friday, Thursday. So I apologize. I'm sorry,
Oh,
I
no
can't do it
problem.
the night, but the following week, Milwaukee Ribside Boxcar we can do.
Okay, good. That'll be the 16th then, right?
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
Great. So, so we're looking for a presenter for next week. If you're interested, let me know, or Ron. And otherwise we'll just get together and talk about what we're up to. But appreciate everybody showing up today, and thanks very much, Mark, for sharing your presentation. And I hope you guys have a safe and enjoyable weekend.
Thank you.
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
All right, that's
Thank you.
great.
All right, thank you.
A great show.